and then I'm ready. Okay.
So so have you let everyone in now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes. Good. So welcome again everyone to this series of Australian Compassion Council webinars. These webinar forums provide us with the opportunity to reflect on compassion in a time of pandemic. We are in extraordinary times, and compassion certainly has a contribution to make in visioning a better future for our Earth and every person and living being on our planet. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which we meet. So I'm on the Wadawurrung land, and I will pay respect to Wadawurrung elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to invite you to take a pause and acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which you are situated at the moment. So my name is Lynn Reader, and I'm the National Chair of the Australian Compassion Council. Other members of this council include Terry Ailing, Dr. Debbie Ling, Mark Crosweller, Louise Murphy, Dr. Sue Sumskis, and our National Indigenous Advisor, Al Harris, a Noongar elder, an amazing Indigenous educator. So the Australian Compassion Council is part of the Charter for Compassion, a global network that is bringing the ethics and evidence base of compassion to the world. In this webinar series last week, Hugh McKay, a social researcher, spoke about compassion and social inclusion. And in coming weeks, we will hear about the ethics of compassionate leadership, the soothing power of music, and we'll finish the importance of creativity in growing our compassion. And we'll finish by outlining the ways in which the Australian Compassion Council is deep dreaming Australia a continent for compassion. But this week, I'm very pleased to welcome Jenny Donovan. Jenny is an urban designer, and she's principal director of the Melbourne-based practice Inclusive Design, although Jenny's just moved to Tasmania, so I suppose it's Tasmanian Inclusive Design, and a sessional member of the Planning Panels Victoria, an international advisor for the UN Habitat, and a sessional lecturer at La Trobe University. She is committed to creating places where people can thrive through reconciling economic realities with social and ecological responsibilities. She is the author of 3 books, including her latest, Designing the Compassionate City, Creating Places Where People Thrive. So welcome, Jenny. I have to say, I suppose, to start with, that urban design and compassion are obviously, not that connected. So I'm wondering how you define compassion in the context of urban and landscape design.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, I can see why you might, at first glance, consider that they're not connected. In order to answer it, there's 2 dimensions that you can look at how they're connected. One is about the process, the way you do urban design, landscape design, planning. Like any human endeavor, when we set out to do planning and urban design, we do it with values. We do it with a degree of, what matters to us, what our priorities are. If we look at these problems through the filter of how do we meet human needs, how do we create places where people can thrive, where they can meet their needs and fulfill their potential, then that gives us a different mindset, a different way of looking at the problem. If we invest a lot of emotional capital into what we do, that way we can create compassionate places. Now, by emotional capital, I mean caring about a problem, caring about the people who will experience the place afterwards. You can throw as much money as you want at a problem, but if the people who are designing it, building it, living in it, don't care for it, it doesn't matter to them, it's not going to make that connection with them and help them meet their needs. Now, I've seen this in many, many different projects where the ability of a project to meet the needs of the people who experience it is in no way connected to the amount of money thrown at it. Some small projects undertaken by communities have made a profound difference to the people in that community. And some big projects have even not made a difference or made a negative difference. So that emotional capital is one aspect of how compassion builds into urban design. The next, or the other aspect I'd say is the messages. The product of urban design is the messages we build into urban design. When I say the messages, what I mean is, when we build a place, it communicates something to us. It invites us or deters us from doing things. Like, for example, when you build a motorway, you're not, the message very strongly is don't walk here, for example, it's just drive a car. When you build a footpath through a nice park, the message is very strongly to invite people to walk there. It's saying, you're welcome to walk. And that's just two very polarized examples of the messages we build into our environments. But if, as a designer, and as people interested in the design process, if we can invest emotional capital, if we can think what's important and think it's the quality of life of the people who live in these places, we can design any of the environments that we want in a way that's more mindful, more considerate of those human needs. But we do need to be aware of them, and we do need to be aware that they matter. And that's, in my view, how compassion feeds into urban design.
Yes, yes, it's that sort of intention, isn't it, in what we're bringing to this design element. And I know in your book you say that compassionate cities offer residents, the opportunities to form bonds and facilitate formal and informal networks and create safe spaces for nurturing those social activities. So I was just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about some other attributes of compassionate cities.
Sure. There are particular qualities through experience you learn are more nurturing for people to sort of do all the things that they need, to connect to other people, to experience nature, to get the physical activity that are going to maintain emotional, cognitive, and physiological health. One of those qualities is that places are what I call sticky. Now, what I mean by sticky is that they make you want to stay there. Mm-hmm. If you can imagine 100 people pass through a place every day, if they only spend 10 minutes in those places, then they're unlikely to be there when the next person comes through. And their experience of it is that they're the only one there, they never meet anyone. But if people feel comfortable and they want to linger, they want to stay, and they're there for 10 minutes in that space, then they're much more likely to be there when the next person passes through. It's not inevitable, but then that space becomes a social space. It becomes a place where that connection is possible. It doesn't make it inevitable, nor do we want to make it inevitable, but at least we want to make it possible. Another quality is what I call the adornability, how adornable a space is. Now, Jan Gehl is very fond of quoting the Icelandic saying, "Man is man's greatest joy." And there's nothing better that we can do to a place than enabling other people to share it with us and enjoy it with us. And that sort of adds that extra magic to a place. And that's, adorning the place by people. And we can do that by giving spaces that people interact with, you can see people laughing, playing, all sorts of things that add life to a place. So you can do it by what people do in the space and also by the marks they leave behind them. If you facilitate people, encourage people to do things like, little doorstep gardens or little front gardens or anything that they can leave a mark on and add a little bit of beauty and just uniqueness to a space, or street art of any sort can add that level of quality that makes a place more compassionate than it would otherwise be, because it projects those qualities to the people who are also there at the time or who see it afterwards. And then there's a quality of incidentality. Now, when you think about human needs, they're very diverse. There's lots of them. We could spend all day running from a place where we have activity, running to another place where we get, mentally stimulated, running to another place where we get connect to other people. And then we have stress of going to all the places where we need to meet our needs. But if we can design places that meet several of those needs at once, then it has this quality of incidentality. And by this, I'm thinking about places like, well-designed parks, where you can experience nature, where you can connect with other people, where you can get exercise, where you can benefit from the bioservices of trees and taking out pollution in many different ways, giving you that sort of like restorative environment where you can overcome the stresses of your day-to-day environment. If you can create those incidental places which are rich in their ability to meet people's needs, then that is good, compassionate urban design.
Yes, yes, it's as you say, it's that bringing this knowledge to the ways in which people are doing design really can end up in very different outcomes, and it's a great thing that you're challenging local governments and cities more generally to be really engaging in this. And yeah, so I suppose too at this time, where we're isolated and we can see that landscapes are, rejuvenating, and our air pollution is going down, that we, by isolating, we're actually having a major impact on our environment. And so I was just wondering, what I'm asking each of the speakers actually, what is your enduring image that so far you've had as in time, at this time of pandemic? What are you sort of, what's the image you're capturing of this time?
It's funny, but when you'd sent me that question beforehand, I was thinking about what it was, and there was a few things I was thinking. The one I had decided on, in the end, it was pretty much the same as what Hugh McKay said. Since this pandemic has been going about, and just for emotional health and for physical health, I've been making sure I do my daily walks or runs. And in that, you bump into places, particularly in the places where I was living till recently, Albert Park, which has, a beautiful footpath network, where urban walking is a safe and a fun thing to do. So there are other people on the streets, and where I'm living now, in the town of Burnley, where people are just friendly anyway, but you pass people and you get that little smile. Everyone gives you a little smile, which to me speaks of shared humanity, of people acknowledging, the inherent dignity of everyone, that we're all suffering and that matters. And people are offering that reassurance nearly universally to those people you go past. And in some ways, the stress, the allostatic load placed on us by going through this horribleness is in many ways, it's greatly lifted just by that acknowledgement, by that sort of, the invisible sort of bonds between us that are nurturing us and holding us up when otherwise we may, be at risk of collapsing. And that to a large extent is possible because I have been able to walk around and to sort of like, safely distance to pass people and to benefit from that smile or that, that hello. And I worry for those poor people who live in places where, even at the best of times, they wouldn't see anyone on the footpath. This sort of restorative experience is going to be largely denied to them. And, that's a very, very sad thing.
Yes, yeah. Well, your book really goes into a lot of detail about how we can start to see this suffering, which is again what compassion is: seeing suffering and being moved by that and taking resourced action. And I know that you go into a bit more detail about how we're going to engage and connect to people. that urban communities comprise software, hardware, and orgware. So I want you, to tell us a little bit more about hardware, software, and orgware, and how they impact design processes.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a bowerbird. I borrowed those terms from computing, which is, I must admit, a subject I know very little about, but it just seemed to capture what cities are about well. So hardware is the physical structure of cities. It's the buildings, it's the trees, it's the footpaths, it's the roads, the engineering, all the sorts of things that make a city the physical thing that we can see. Software is what's in the hearts and the minds of people who live in that city. It's the way they look at their hardware. It's what it means to them. As I'm sure you'd be aware, like you can take two people to the same thing and it evokes very different reactions. So sometimes the same hardware, very different software. And the orgware is the approach, the values that the organization that's running it has to it. Now, the orgware is like, if you want to design a footpath, if you really cared about the likelihood of people walking on that footpath, you would do your best design on it. You would give it a big budget. You would budget for ongoing management and maintenance. So the orgware is a sort of values of the organization that controls the environment. And you need to get all of them happening and all of them right. Unfortunately, what often happens is well-meaning people in government, in anyone in authority, will concentrate on one thing over the other. They might say, we want the best footpath, but they don't think about the mindset of the people, who will be using it. They don't promote it. And often they don't think about the management and the maintenance of that footpath down the track. So they might create this big, great footpath, and then no one uses it because no one wants to use it. It's not in the software, they don't think about using it. And it soon deteriorates. And then the conclusion they draw is, well, that wasn't worth it. Let's not do it again. So to tie those concepts together with this example of a footpath, imagine a footpath in a community where people don't walk very much, where there is a very bad rate of non-communicable diseases related to lack of physical activity. A well-meaning council might say, let's build a footpath through this area to encourage people to walk. So when they build a footpath, that's the hardware. But to get it to work, they also need initiatives and programs to promote walking, to change the software in people's hearts and minds. And they also need to make sure that they invest in getting not just a work experience kid to design it because it's cheapest, but to get the best designer and a reasonable budget and reasonable levels of community engagement into designing it and then managing it to make sure that it accords with the values of people in that community, and it can do so into the long term so that bit of infrastructure gets embedded in the community. So when you get all those right, the software, the heads and heart thing, the hardware and the orgware, then you can get the maximum benefit from your interventions.
Yes, yes. And I know that you're talking about that you're not only then looking at the concept of or the urban design up front, but what you're saying is looking at the output of that urban design to consider, the impact on the lives of people who experience that design. And you've collected quite a number of examples from around the world of where that's done well. So I wondered if you'd share some of those with us.
Yeah, it's I feel very privileged that through my work, my experience, and the good fortune I've been able to have to be able to follow this line of work, that I have come across some inspiring examples of places where people have looked beyond the output. Quite often, designers just have a picture of what a place looks like, how it should be built, and that's the end of their interest. It's not that they're bad designers, it's just that's what the establishment teaches them to do. But I would say, and from what I've seen, the real difference that we want to make is in our hearts and in our minds. The difference on the ground is only a means to an end. It's absolutely essential, of course. But when you can have people who can live in a place and feel that that place resonates with them, that the place matters to them, that it's a place that they can put down roots and can be grounded and they can thrive in, that's what good design is. And when I think of an example of that, I was recently, this wasn't a project I was involved with personally, but I had the good fortune of talking to the architect of the Freedom from Torture Centre in London. And to look at the building, it's a building which, you know, doesn't look like great architecture, but when you talk to him and you talk about the way they considered the trauma that people were going through in that centre and how that place could be a place where people could receive therapy, where people could receive all the experiences they needed to, restorative experiences to overcome their trauma, and where people's stories of that torture could be gathered and used as a centre for advocacy to sort of break down, to make us all aware that, you know, we can't say we didn't know. This place does great work, and it's a work that happens because of the environment that was created there. It's quite powerful and inspiring, and if anyone listening would like to more information, please let me know and I'll pass on information about the centre.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, and I just want to say, just before I ask the next question, if people have any questions, please type them in. We'll be going to your questions shortly. Jenny's raised such a lot of wonderful ideas and challenged us, so please send in your questions. So, but I suppose the next one was around the cost, because, I mean, governments have to always make priority decisions, and particularly now with how they're spending their money. So I was just wondering, in your book, you acknowledge that there are costs involved in compassionate design. So I just wanted you to talk to what are those costs and what makes them worth paying.
Yeah, there are costs. If you want to, like at the heart of compassionate design is engaging with the people who you're designing for, and to do that in a way that you don't appropriate benefits from people in the future or people elsewhere. So it's a very difficult balancing act to do. That needs time, it needs care, it needs engagement with communities and with any group of people who they're not, you know, typically most people in the community aren't trained in working in the built environment. It's a volatile force as emotional capital. It needs to be very carefully handled. This needs, you know, lots of going back and forward. It makes the design process longer. And that's always going to take time. And with professionals involved, even with community help, that's, you know, it will take some money. But then again, when you think about the costs of not doing it, of the terrible incidents of non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases in our community that are only getting worse. It's not a battle that we're winning at the moment. This is causing a massive burden on our economy, but more than that, it's profoundly unfair. It consigns people to diminished lives where they're not going to do so well at school, they're not going to have as good a career, and their lives are going to be shortened, diminished in quality and quantity. And these can all be influenced by the environment we live in. When our environment invites us to do healthy things and makes it not just possible, but preferable to walk, to connect to other people, to experience nature, then we can, it's not the only thing that needs to happen, but it's an essential thing that needs to happen. And when you think about that, when you think about the health impacts of bad design, or design which is, let's say, not compassionate, and you think about the years of life lost, the years of quality of life diminished, the question, I think, isn't why should we pay for it? It's how can we justify not paying for it?
Yes, yeah, there are. I think certainly local governments are more and more realising that those externalities, it's not just the cost up front, but if you're then factoring in the less crime and less health costs, that they are really looking at this very seriously now. I know that there's, I think it's Eric Kleinenberg who wrote a book about social infrastructure, and saying that it's important that this is factored into the physical and economic infrastructure, and we're only just at the start of that process with governments around the world. Just at the start of wellbeing budgets, for example, in New Zealand. I know the EU is starting to look at wellbeing budgets as well. And so I see that this work very much contributes to this discussion underway within governments. So I can't see that there are any questions, Marilyn. I can only see there's one comment, but so so here Marilyn said, do you have good examples where citizens are involved in creating compassionate cities?
Yeah, well, two things spring to mind. On a citywide basis, the exercise that was done in the city of Christchurch in New Zealand in the aftermath of the earthquakes was a very inclusive process. It was very easy to engage in and created this real sense that if not everyone, many people were taking on this journey together to create a better place. And I hear stories of how people were attending sessions because it was a way of nurturing hope and a way of nurturing the sense of they could all be involved in making a better place. They could be empowered to making a better place for their city. And the reporting back from the city was exceptional in terms of making the findings clear and setting a direction and balancing the often bad problems of consultation fatigue with the ability or the need to get as much really rich, good two-way flow of information as possible. Whether they've been successful in the actual realization of that plan is, it's partly debatable. They've still achieved a great thing. They've still achieved great things, but certainly the process was quite inspiring. Are also saying.
And Jenny, have you come across the green scripts and social scripts? So this is where GPs are actually formally prescribing scripts for people who, the medical model isn't working, and so to spend time in nature and visit art galleries, but in quite a formal way. It's not just go for a walk. It's, on Tuesday at 4, go to this park and go on this walk. So have you come across the green scripts and social scripts?
I have, yes. I've had the good fortune of working from time to time with the Groundwork in the UK, which is a community environmental development trust. And I've been hearing stories of how that's worked over there, and this whole idea of vitamin N, accessing nature, and how there has been a couple of former NHS assets which have been no longer needed for the NHS, which have been sort of utilised to be sort of places where this sort of therapy, this sort of treatment can be facilitated. And yes, quite inspiring and quite brave in many ways for the medical profession to move out of the medical model. And an example of what people can do when they're motivated and inspired by the well-being of others.
Yes, I agree. It's very exciting. Yeah, so thank you, Jenny. That was just wonderful. And I think you've certainly given us a lot to really engage with, and that it's quite a shift in the way we approach design and the environments in which we live. And so it's really important. And thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And I want to let everyone know that next week I'll be in conversation with Mark Crosweller. So Mark was formerly head of Emergency Management Australia and is now doing amazing PhD on ethics of compassionate leadership. And as part of his PhD has interviewed amazing leaders right across the world, and he'll be able to talk to us about what he's finding. So thank you, Jenny, and yeah, and look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lynn.
Bye.